Over the last few years, the Chod Rig has become one of the most popular rigs in carp fishing, and rightly so. There's loads and loads of different ways to tie it up, loads of different versions, and today I'm going to show you the version I use and the components that I use, which I believe make it the best way to fish it. Starting off at the bottom end of the leader, you can see that I use lead core straight away. I'm a big believer in lead core. I believe it helps to hook the fish, and when it's correctly set up and safely set up, the longer length of lead core you can get away with using, I believe, to be better, providing it's safe, because the added weight of the lead core drastically helps in the hooking potential of the rig and helps to hook the fish. So we start this end. First thing you can see, if I just peel this sleeve back, is I've spliced on a tiny little quick link there, and that's basically just if I need to change leads, if I need to fish at range or want to drop the size of the lead, if I'm fishing very, very close, I can do that really, really easily without having to tie leads on and off the lead core. So I've spliced that one on there, and for today's fishing, I'm only fishing at about 50-60 yards, so I've just got a small 1 1/4 ounce square lead. It's one of the lead shed ones with a mucky coating, and when these get wet they go literally black in the water, and in the silt and in the dirty areas of the lake that I'm going to be targeting today, you can't see it at all. Just to neaten all that off, I've got a silk coloured trimmed down helicopter sleeve. Just covers all the metal wear up, keeps everything nice and neat. And then the first thing I do, which is a little bit different with my Chod Rig setup, is about 12 to 14 inches from the lead. You can see there, I've just tied a small, very neat overhand 3-turn knot, and what that does, once it's pulled down tight, is it just acts as a buffer, and I've got a rock hard plastic bead which sits tight up against the knot. The purpose of the hard bead is to stop the ring swivel, which the rig is going to be attached to, sliding down and going all the way down to the lead. Now this is the first major change that I make in my Chod rigs compared to the more conventional way of fishing them. And the idea behind the knot and the stop bead to stop the rig sliding all the way down is that I don't want the rig on the cast anywhere near the lead. I don't want the hook point to whack into the lead and blunt the hook. I definitely don't want it digging into this silicone sleeve and ending up sort of semi-tangled on the cast. So what it actually does is, on the cast, the closest that the rig is going to get to the lead is by this bead. The second reason I like to use this stop knot is to help to prevent hook pulls. The last thing I want in the event of hooking a fish is for the rig to slide all the way down under tension. The fish is going to use the weight of the lead when it shakes its head to throw the hook. So by keeping the hook link well away from the lead, when the fish shakes its head, you can see there's virtually no resistance in there at all, and there's no way the fish can use the lead to throw the hook. Moving down the leader, you can see it's quite a long piece of lead core. I'm using 7 feet of lead core, in fact, which might seem a little bit excessive, but I've got it set up as safely as possible, and I'm really looking to have as much weight as possible in the leader, so when the fish picks the hook bait up, it's the weight of the wet lead core is going to pull down and help to hook the fish. So the lead core is a really, really important component to this rig. I have used naked Chod rigs and I've done okay on them, but I really believe that the lead core version is the better version if the rules allow lead core and if you obviously set it up safely. So about 6 inches from the end, we've got a tiny, tiny piece of silicone tube, which I've stretched out a little bit on there just to reduce the diameter of the tubing, and what that does is it just makes the interference fit there on the bead very, very minimal. So in the event of a crack off or any breakage, this little 5mm tapered bead's going to come straight off easily and over the small splice at the top and slide off down the main line. Every time you cast out, just make sure that the silicone's nice and wet, and then it will make sure that the bead doesn't get jammed on, making sure the fish doesn't get in any trouble. A lot of people frown on using long lengths of lead core like this. I like using them, but you have to make sure that that top bead is 100% safe and make sure that comes off in the event of any breakages. So moving back down the leader, just hold that up there for you, and that is my Chod rig. That's how it looks. And starting at the bottom of the rig, another very, very, very important component. This is an ESP high performance swivel. It's a ring swivel, a flexi ring swivel in a size 11. It's a small swivel, and the difference with these high performance swivels compared to your average off the shelf swivel is that these are Japanese made, they're very high quality, and they're not Teflon coated. So like nearly everything on the market these days, most things are Teflon coated. These Japanese high performance swivels are 50-pound test braking strain, so they're very, very strong. You're never going to encounter any breakages or these ever let you down. I've pulled fish in excess of 45 pounds out of heavy weed with these, and they really, really do the job well. And the beauty about them having no Teflon on them is that there's no resistance at all in the barrel of the swivel. There's no friction, and they just spin and turn ridiculously well. The fish has only got to breathe heavy near these, and they're going to start to spin and turn into the bottom lip. And again, they are one of the major components of this rig. I'm absolutely convinced that this rig doesn't work as well without these swivels. And then moving up, unlike most people tend to use 15 and 20 pound bristle filaments and chod filaments, whichever one you like to use. I use the ESP bristle filament, the original one, but I use it in 25 pound. And the reason I use it in the 25 pound braking strain is not really so much for strength as you might think, but it's actually for the stiffness. The Chod rig's supposed to be a stiff rig, and personally I don't see any point in making it any flimsier than it needs to be. I like it as stiff as possible, and I believe that the stiffer it is, the harder it is for the carp to deal with. So it's 25 pound bristle filament. I wouldn't call it a particularly long chod, and I wouldn't call it a particularly short chod. It's average length. If it's straightened out, it's probably a couple of inches. Plus you've got the length of the swivel on there as well. It's probably 2.5 inches in total. But obviously you can see I've curved it there, and that's going to make it sit a little bit lower depending on what sort of bottom I'm fishing over. It's hopefully going to help it make it look a little less obvious. Everybody's got their way they like to tie it. Some people use whipping knot, some people use a Domhoff knot. I use a standard knotless knot, a 7-turn knotless knot. It's nice and easy. And I like quite a big D on the back there. I like a little bit of separation between the hook bait and the hook, just like to make sure the hook's gone all the way in. And then I've just got a medium-sized rig ring on there, ready to tie the hook bait on. Now the bit that's slightly different, this end you'll see, the most popular way to tie this rig is with a 2-turn blood knot. Some people like an overhand knot these days. I've actually been using these crimps now for probably the last 3 years. There's a couple of different companies that make them. I've tried them all. They're all of a muchness really. All the ones I've tried have been really, really good. And the idea with these is they're just a lot quicker, a lot simpler. You can see I've got a nice loop in there that's about 5 mil long, gives the rig a little bit more movement. And the crimps work really, really well with the stiffer materials. You'll find if you start crimping coated braids and soft braids, it won't work. But rest assured, with these stiff, especially the thicker materials, using the 25 pound bristle filament really gives the crimp something to grip onto, and they tighten down really, really well. They don't damage the bristle filament, and in the event of having a fish, it's like match fishing. You can just snip it off, leave the hook in, crimp another rig on, tie a hook bait on, nice and easy, and you're straight back out. There's no messing around with knots. The only thing you do need to be a little bit mindful of with this, which you can probably just see here, is that once I've crimped it on and snipped the tag end off, the tag end of the bristle filament is going to be very, very sharp. Now these hook holds tend to go a long way back in the fish's mouth, which is what makes the chod so effective. And if you've got a sharp edge of the tag end sticking out and the fish is obviously thrashing around, moving around, trying to throw the hook, you can get some mouth damage on the inside. So make sure you just get a lighter, protect the bristle filament, the rig, with your fingers, and blob the end so it's nice and kind to the fish. It's rounded at the end and you don't get any mouth damage at all. Finish it off with a nice little curve. Some people like to steam them. You can steam them. With this 25 pound filament so stiff, you don't really need to. It's really user friendly. And I'm just looking for, when it sits up there, for the hook to sit perpendicular to the bottom. I want it at 90 degrees. I want the hook facing straight down, so when the fish comes in, it's just going to sit straight. It's going to spin on the swivel and sit straight in the bottom lip. Okay, the last thing to notice about the rig, as we've already said, is one stop bead at the bottom of the leader is about 1 foot from the lead, and then the other one, moving down, is right up the other end, maybe 6 inches from the end of the splice. So you can see that the rig, my wingspan's just about long enough, is about 6 feet, 5.5 to 6 feet, running all the way up and down the leader. And what that does again is once the fish picks it up, it can use the whole weight of the lead core, especially when it's wet. It's going to be really, really heavy, to pull down and help to hook the fish. The second thing that it does, which is why I believe it makes this rig so effective, is that on a normal rig, if you're fishing a 6-inch hook link off of a lead clip or a helicopter rig or something along them lines, We all know that when the fish shakes its head, they can use the lead to catapult the hook link out and throw the hook. With this, it's completely running. So even if a big fish is shaking its head on the spot, you can see it's free running, it's moving straight up and down the lead core. I'm fishing it off a very, very slack line. So there's very little resistance this end, very little resistance the other end because of the slack line, and the fish just hasn't got anything there to throw the hook with at all. Obviously you get some funny bites with this rig, it will pick it up and sometimes it will drop back. You don't really get one-toners or screamers, so you constantly have to watch your line when you get bites. If you get bleeps, watch your line, watch your rod tips, and you'll get a much better indication from there normally with this rig than you will from your buzzer. Now most people like to tie their hook bait on first and then tie another knot onto the rig. The problem I see with that sometimes is once you've tied the hook bait onto the bait floss, you tie it on, and then you've got to blob the knot that you tie onto the rig ring, and then you've got the flame very, very close to the rig, so you're going to risk burning the rig. So I like to just tie one knot and keep it simple. So first thing I do is I take quite a long length of super floss. It's a flat profile, this floss, so it grips the hook bait a little bit better. So I'm going to take about a foot or so. Next thing I'm going to do is wet it thoroughly, just to make sure the knot slides when I tie the knot. And then through the rig ring on the back, I'm just going to thread it through there. So instead of tying the hook bait on, we're actually going to tie the rig on first. So if you can see, I'm going to wrap it around 3 fingers, leaving a tag end. And then on the second wrap, I'm just going to wrap it around 2 fingers, making a little grinner. I'm just going to wind that through twice, through both loops, on the opposite tag end. Make a little slip knot, and then just pull it down. So while it's still nice and wet, I'm going to pull that halfway down, so you can see we've got a nice loop there. Take your chosen pop-up. Goes without saying you need a really, really buoyant pop-up for this rig. It's got a big hook, there's a size 5 stiff rigger on there. You've got heavy bristle filament, 25 pounds, you've got a heavy swivel and a lot of lead core, so you need something really, really buoyant to hold this up. Corkball pop-ups are really, really good. Personally, I use these mainline ones. The new Polaris mix on these is super, super buoyant that they use to make these. These are my favourite milky toffees. White ones seem to do quite well on white. First thing I'm going to do is just wet the boilie slightly, and then that just helps it to grip and helps it to cut in when you tie it down. So just put it in the middle of the loop and then just pull your slip knot down. Just take a couple of seconds to line the bait floss up, absolutely bang in the middle of the hook bait. The last thing you want is it skewed off to one side, so when you tighten the knot down, the hook bait's going to pop out, or when you cast it will fall off. Or the other problem you can get if you do tie it off centre is it can sit off to one side and throw the hook off to one side. Just wet it again. Make sure the outside skin of the pop-up's nice and soft, and then just tighten it down. And you want to tighten it down just enough so that it just ever so slightly cuts into the outer skin of the pop-up. Don't tighten it down so hard that you cut into it, because eventually then when the hook bait swells slightly in the water, it will cut in even further and it will fall off. So just enough for it to grip. It's really strong, this super floss. You can give it quite a good pull, and then from there, nice and easy, just a couple of overhand knots over the top to secure the knot. Good pull. And there we go, perfectly in the middle. Now I'm just going to finish the rig off, snip the tag ends off, and then using a lighter, just going to blob the ends of the bait floss down. Once they're blobbed down, just squash them all down, so there's no way that knot can come undone. Recheck your rig. Make sure that the hook point is absolutely in line with the bristle filament. You don't want it rotated or twisted off to one side at all. You want to hook and plumb in the middle of the bottom lip. Nice subtle curve. If you're going to be casting it a long way, it's a good idea to over curve the rig a little bit, because when you cast it out, if you're giving it a whack, if you're casting it 70, 80, 90 yards or further, it will straighten slightly. So if you're casting short range like I am here today, put the curve that you want in. If you're casting a little further, don't be afraid to put a little bit more curve in it, because it will straighten out. And then from there, we've got one perfect chod rig, ready to be cast out in a lake, and probably the best big fish rig that there is out there.